Thanks for tuning in to the Football Talk Squadron. I'm Dutch.
And I'm Pops.
And this is our college football recap of the playoff rankings. So the week before the championship games, we'll talk about the championship games, but more importantly, we'll talk the playoff rankings, mainly because this is the first question I got to you. Is the conference championship games going to change anything other than seeding?
Man, I mean, I feel like at this late in the season, we'll see. I think this is the perfect way for us to see how the committee is going to operate moving forward. We kind of get the first litmus test of, we bounce back to last year of how they handled Florida State, even though they were undefeated, yada, 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 like the controversy that led there. Now we'll see if there's any controversy this week. If one of the lower seeds ends up beating out the top dog for whatever conference championship they're playing for, like, even let's say Clemson knocks off SMU this weekend, just seeing those types of scenarios play out and just how the committee handles that will be interesting to see, in my opinion.
For sure. I sit back, my logic is that I don't, outside of the ACC, because I think the committee has already, based upon this latest rankings, told the ACC to go ahead and kick rocks this year as a conference as a whole. I don't see either the SEC or Big Ten champ, or, for sure not the champ, but the runner-up not being left out, mainly because it really devalues the championship game to get there. Because if, let's say that Texas wins, gives Georgia a third loss, there's no way that they're going to bump Georgia out of the rankings. Now they've made that clear because Bama's right now in at 11. But the only scenario that I can possibly see is exactly what you bring up of a Florida State. Like, let's say Oregon just 63-0 Penn State. Mm-hmm. And in the process, their starting quarterback goes down in like the first quarter, breaks his leg, where there's no chance of him coming back. He's done. And the backup looks absolutely awful. It's like, well, now you have this, like, what do you do? Do you move Penn State out? And hopefully that doesn't happen. I'm not arguing that for it all. But the committee, you sort of talk about that bias. They've set a precedence last year with Florida State of doing something like that. It will be I don't see any game getting like out of control beat down, but it's happened before. Ohio State snuck in with a 4-team playoff in the year of its inception with a third-string quarterback. They went 59-0 against Wisconsin. That allowed Cardale Jones to come in. They eventually became the national champions that year. When you look at the committee rankings, I guess we can just attack the elephant in the room, per se, with Bama. What was your thoughts with them putting them at 11 and Miami falling out of contention?
Dude, the worst part for me is, yes, if you do the analytics of the strength of record, strength of schedule, that type of deal that, all the medias are posting out. Yeah, Alabama does look better on paper per those stats. But you go back and you're just like, dude, they got dog walked by Oklahoma. Couldn't even put up a touchdown against a team that looks like hot garbage all season long. And, also the loss to Vandy, those two losses alone, should take Alabama out of contention, in my opinion, for them being a third, being a 3-loss team. Obviously they didn't. They think that they're going to be a competitive team, which we've said it this year. Like Maul said it last week. It was like, there is no clear-cut favorite out of these 12 teams that I was like, oh, yeah, they're winning, period, dot. Like, you look at the NFL, it's like, hey, I think the Lions are the team to stop. Like, I think we can all agree on that. But if we come to college, it's just like, dude, any given Saturday, like, I don't know who's going to win. Like, this weekend, you would think Texas would get the upper hand against Georgia, but who knows? They might beat them again. Like, there's just so many things that are unpredictable this year with college football, in my personal opinion.
The problem I have with the Bama is, do I think they should have gotten in? I'll be very blunt with this answer.
No.
No. Like, the committee's justification for Bama hopping Miami should have also led them to hop Indiana, in my opinion. Because this like metrics of like, well, their strength of schedule, top 25 wins. It's like, well, then you look at Indiana and you go, well, what's their best win? It has to be an unranked Michigan because Michigan just beat Ohio State. Well, if that's the case, like, why are they not higher in the polls above SMU, above Tennessee, even above Georgia, just sitting there right behind Ohio State? Why did the committee not do that? And this, for me, I brought it up with you, is in terms of when we were teaching pilot training of how we would like grade kids. And just to put this for our audience, for those of you who have never worked in pilot training of the Air Force, you sit back and it's like how a kid flew his daily rides, every single event's graded. And they have, 70 something events in a T-38. All of those are graded. That accounts for roughly 35% of their score. Another 35% of the scores just out of the 3 check rides that they do. You're going to get another 35% from that, 20% academics. And then the final 10% was a flight commander ranking that the flight commander got to rank. The biggest problem I have with the committee is it is 100% a flight commander ranking. Like, nothing about, they can move a team as far up or down because everyone's sitting back and they're like, yeah, Miami lost. I get it was to a Syracuse, but I sit back and the far worse loss was Ohio State getting beat by Michigan.
Fact.
Dude, Michigan is a terrible team. Terrible. And I think even Michigan fans admit that. Like, they were down their best offensive and defensive player this game, turned the ball over. They do not have a quarterback. They had a walk-on in who, bless his heart, in Ohio State of all things. Like, this, everything was about not Ohio State winning, but by how much. They were 3 touchdown favorites to win that game. Now, I'm sure I have Ohio State fans right now being like, well, Bama was picked by that. I get that. You already heard me say Bama shouldn't be in, so shut up. This is about Ohio State. It was a terrible loss. And they dropped 4 spots. And it was just like, now I'm going to go into it here in a second of why I think the rankings are like they are. Because I told you guys from the beginning, like, if you think that the committee is not going to put teams in specific order so that they get the matchups that they want in the next round, you're crazy. You're crazy. And I'll talk about some different scenarios that I think will challenge that. But yeah, how the committee ranks in them having 100% say in not being held, like, if a team has 1 loss, you can't bump them out of, there needs to be a formula. Like, I appreciate a human eye to it. Like, I do from a top 25. Like, you have 62 voters that sit out and vote and they come up with a ranking. But the fact that in a day where everything's tracked, every offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency, third down, sacks, interceptions, turnover margin, scoring margin, did they cover the spread? Did they not? Did they win at home? Did they win on the road? All these different factors that you can take in and really just build into a formula that says, hey, based upon this, I know ESPN tries to do it with their FPI. I don't think it's the best equation in the world, but to sit down and say, okay, that makes up, even if it's 50% of the score, like, you give the committee a way bigger margin and say, hey, 50% comes from this, 50% comes from that. It makes it so that you can't move a team 6. It makes the season count. Like, I think that's the part that people get frustrated about is no matter what happened during the season, Bama sitting there with 3 losses and Miami got 2. Miami, you're out.
Yep.
So,
well, and that's the thing too, though, is like playing devil's advocate, like sitting back and actually watching the games themselves. Like, how many times this season we're like, dude, Miami's about to get beat. Miami's about to get beat. And it's just like these teams that they had no business losing the game to. You go back and you're just like, well, hey, the ACC just goes back to this competition-based mentality of like they're not that good of a team to go play up against the SEC teams. So like you can kind of see why they move things around the way that they do. But there's definitely going to be some question marks as far as, just like you said, the matchups in the next round. That's going to promote the viewership and more money for them and everything else. And dude, you hit it spot on. Like, going back to this past weekend with that Ohio State game, like, Michigan was ready. Like, it was that standard. Like, Ohio State had everything to lose, and they blew it. Like, Michigan was going to do everything they could to wreck your day, and they succeeded at doing that. And Ryan Day just didn't have an answer, and it looks horrible. Looks absolutely horrible. The fact that he can't even beat a 500 team.
Just as a side note, because I do want to throw it on there, if you couldn't beat the team in 4 quarters, sorry, they get to plant a flag on your field. Suck it. Like, that's in another side note. The fact that Michigan State players get pepper sprayed, like, think about all the fights in sports. You get the Malice at the Palace with Ron Artest. You've got, Miami FIU from a decade ago. You got Clemson, South Carolina. That fight with Lou Holtz and them, still legendary. No mace. Like, you can't tell me that wasn't Ohio State police doing what the players couldn't do, which was get Michigan off the field. Like, that was just some grouchy old dudes with pepper spray. That, I just sit back and I look at the other tweet I sent you guys, which made me laugh about the rivalry, which is if your teams didn't at least fight at some point during the game, then it's not a rivalry. But let's talk about a little bit, because this is what I had, because I want to foreshape the championship games with sort of what I see happening. So, in my opinion, no matter what happens this weekend, whatever happens, Notre Dame will be the number 5. It's not showing up right now because they're not taking into account. They're just taking the straight rankings, but Notre Dame will be the highest ranked non-conference champ because they don't play in a conference.
Yep.
Notre Dame, in my opinion, is going to face. Sorry, I'm getting choked up thinking about how terrible this rank is. Notre Dame is going to face one of 4 teams, in my opinion, regardless of what happens. They're going to face either the winner of Arizona State, Iowa, UNLV, if they pull off the shocker, or as long as Boise beats UNLV, regardless of the matchup of Arizona State, Iowa State, they'll play Clemson. That, in my opinion, is who Notre Dame will face, regardless of how the championship games go. They're going to give them the matchup. And I say this, I've went through, gave a bunch of different scenarios that I wrote down in terms of how I think the games are going to be played. The reason Notre Dame comes in at 5 is then if you look behind them right now, Ohio State would be number 6. What matchup would that create? Well, they'd play the 11th seed, Bama. Bama goes to Ohio State. That's a marquee. They'll hype that game up to all day. This is where it gets interesting, in my opinion. Right now in the polls, Penn State, according to the committee, is number 3. Georgia's number 5. Let's say both lose. They have to put Georgia ahead of Penn State in the final rankings in order to avoid Georgia playing Tennessee again. I think that Georgia will get put ahead in the rankings. They'll finish at the number 7 seed. They'll get a home game against Indiana. Penn State will finish number 8, and they'll get a home game against Tennessee. I do not see the committee putting Georgia at, behind Penn State, because it would lead to a repeat matchup, and it just doesn't sell. Like, we know how that first matchup went when Tennessee. It's far better to let the new matchup take over. Now, it would present Georgia would end up going and facing Texas again the following week, but that's how I see it going right now. The other big matchup is if Oregon loses, which I think you sort of alluded to with the Georgia-Texas, which I think is interesting, because for that, in both scenarios, I think Bama's going to face one of 3 opponents, regardless of what happens. Either if all the conference favorites win, Bama plays Ohio State. if Oregon loses to Penn State, Bama will play Oregon, and if Georgia beats Texas, Bama will play Texas. They're going to make a matchup that Bama hasn't seen before. Why? Because all three of those games that I just listed, that's huge game. Like that, they're hyping that up for the next, few months or a few weeks after the conference championship game. My question for you is, if you're sitting there and you're looking at the we'll just get in right into the conference championship games. Which ones are you circling as these are the possible upsets, and where do you see them coming? And then we can sort of play the game of where do you think the committee is going to go? Because in my opinion, this sort of gives the how do I want to say it? I'm very confident in saying that we can determine the matchups regardless of how the championship games play out, because I do think the committee is going to rank it certain ways. So we can just start with the Big Ten championship, Oregon, Penn State. What's your confidence level that Penn State can pull off a shocker?
Well, and that's the thing is, again, James Franklin. I mean, that's all you got to say is that the man, is continuing to show that they can't show up in the big games. And let's talk about their one loss this season against Ohio State at home. Well, let's go back to how the committee's supposed to be looking at all this. Ohio State just lost to Michigan. So again, you've got a loss to a team, inflated ranking, as we always say, with Ohio State, that can't even beat a 500 team. And then you lost to them at home. So honestly, again, it all boils down to the fact that James Franklin can't pull off these games. And I think we're going to see that again this weekend. I mean, Oregon just dog walked Washington last weekend, I believe. What was it,
Yep.
like 49-21? Like, just, I think they had like 20 some odd rushing yards at halftime or something like that. Like, Oregon has got it figured out. They did struggle against Wisconsin, I will say that, but I don't see that being an issue with this big of a stage, and a guy like Dan Lanning.
And I sit back and I look at it from the standpoint of, if you want to compare Penn State to Ohio State, or excuse me, Penn State to Indiana in this case, like you look at Penn State's schedule, really the only game that they're hanging their hat on is Illinois. Like, that's it. That we beat Illinois, because they did go out of conference with West Virginia, but their other ones, you got Bowling Green, Kent State, who was awful this year. By awful, they didn't win a game. Illinois, UCLA, USC, which USC turned out to not be a great team, and it took them to overtime to beat them. Played Wisconsin, that was sort of close, 28-13, not as close as the Oregon Wisconsin. Like you said, at home, lost to Ohio State. They did put it on Washington, at Purdue,
But
at
then
Minnesota.
barely beat Minnesota.
Correct. I watched that game. Penn State, Minnesota had that game in the bag. They could not execute late in that game to save their life. Now, credit to Penn State, they ended up winning. I just sort of compare the schedules. What's your thought on how Penn State could possibly shock Oregon? What for you is, how do you beat that team?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you look at, Dan Lanning's a defensive coach, and I mean, for me, it's just the offense has to get out on top. I mean, they've got a decent defense. Penn State's always had a decent defense. That just never had, outside of Saquon, which you stop the run game, you don't have a quarterback to pass. Like Penn State's offense has to be able to penetrate into Oregon's, into Oregon's territory throughout the game and be able to score and get the key downs, the short down and distance to keep drives alive. Like that's going to be their key to success. And it's funny that they've actually got Penn State right now for the predictor by all the analytics that Penn State's a favorite by 54 to 46%, which I think is a little strange.
I don't see it. The only way for me that Penn State's able to capitalize is exactly what you're talking about. It's the line of scrimmage. They have to be able to move Oregon, and I really think that's going to come at the edge rather than the interior. The problem is for Penn State is, I don't feel like Penn State has elite speed at the running back or even the wide receiver position to really control that edge and make it to where, hey, you've got to expand the box, bring a safety down, create other matchups. I haven't seen that from Penn State. Penn State reminds me of like an old 1960s team. They're going to be here to try to lull you to death and just play typical Big Ten football, just drive it down your throat. Wisconsin almost did it. And Wisconsin is a very mirror similar to Penn State and the fact that it's really going to come down to the quarterback. Like, can Penn State's quarterback make the plays when he needs to? The answer to that equation in an Ohio State game was no. Like, but I sit back, Oregon right now is -3.5. I feel comfortable taking Oregon -3.5.
Yeah,
Like,
I agree. And we also look. I mean, we forget that it came down to the last play against Ohio State. With Oregon. So that Oregon has shown lapses earlier in the season, but I think that the kinks have been ironed out, and they're I wouldn't say true favorite throughout the whole entire soon to be tournament. With the CFP. But this weekend, yeah, I would take them without a doubt.
we'll go to the first then conference championship game after this Friday. And this one's more intriguing in my opinion because it's UNLV versus Boise State. I believe this game is in Vegas, which is UNLV's home stadium at the Raiders Stadium. Right now, Boise's -4 for the game. I almost want to call this the upset.
Yes.
This to me is where UNLV comes out and beats Boise State, and it's in Albertson Stadium. Let me double check.
So they're playing in Boise.
Oh, they are playing in Boise. I still like UNLV. I don't know why. I have this feeling with Boise State this year that their offense go into the Maul said this, if he was here, he would probably expound upon this. So I'm not going to take credit for what I'm about to say. This was Maul, but I support him in this statement. Now, when they played Boise State, they lost 29-24. So it was a close game. In terms of the Heisman, Genty, if you take Genty off of that team, Boise State may lose half of their games.
I'd agree.
You sit back and you look at the rush that Genty's had with Boise State. Everyone knows where their offense is. It's with Genty. And my man has never had under 100 yards. His lowest game was 127 against Portland State, and they pulled him out early in that one. But even last week, you sit back and versus Oregon State, my man puts up 226 yards. Now you compare it to Travis Hunter. Not to take anything away from how impressive Travis has been this year with playing both sides of the ball, but would you say at either position in corner or at wide receiver, Travis Hunter's dominant?
So I was having this debacle back and forth as I was driving home because I felt like you would ask me this question. Like, all honesty, it must have been intuition. And I was sitting there, and I've realized that they've taken him off the field a lot on defense this year, more so than you would expect. I mean, he's still playing 140 snaps a game. Like, it's still ridiculous amounts. I think the numbers are skewed on defense because, again, they don't throw to his side of the field, and he's still top 5 or top 15 in interceptions. If you flip it to the other side of the ball where he's catching from Shador, he's leading in touchdowns. I think he's got receptions. I don't think he's got the receiving yards, or maybe I got that backwards between receptions and receiving yards. But the numbers are still there. But I agree from the standpoint that what you said to start this whole discussion off was you take Genty out of Boise State, they don't have a team, and I will follow that on. Do you got a pile on for the Heisman discussion?
Well, in terms of the other thing I would say about this was what Maul said that struck a chord with me, and I was like, yeah, I 100% agree. Like when people sit back and they're like, "Yo, did you watch Reggie Bush when he won the Heisman? What about Tim Tebow, Dad? Like, how was that? Like,
Yeah.
what was Caleb Williams like? What was Devontae Smith like?" You're like, dude, that dude, or Joe Burrow, like that dude was on fire. That no one could stop Joe Burrow. Like
Yeah.
he was the most impressive guy that you've ever seen on the field. There was no doubt my man was a Heisman.
Fact.
This year, like I sit back and with Travis Hunter, it's not to take anything away from him. Like what he's done is amazing. It's impressive. But at no point was I like, that dude was the best dude like in college football. Like you put him, he's beating out every single wide receiver one. Like,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't see. Like I don't see him surpassing Ryan Williams with Bama or Jeremiah Smith with Ohio State. Like I don't see him. He's not going to surpass what those guys are
Yep.
on the field. He's a great corner, but Genty's starting at every single program at the position of running back.
Fact.
Plain and simple. That no one is going to turn away Genty from starting.
And that's the thing going into this weekend for this game. I do agree. I could see this being. I will call it too. This will be an upset. I mean, they almost lost to Wyoming 2 weeks ago, and Wyoming's 2-9. You know, you find a way. And I looked it up. Genty had 170 rushing yards, and they still almost lost the game to Wyoming. That's the thing, is that if you find ways to get those stops where you need them, you know, he can run all day until he gets past, you know, you don't let him get past the safeties. Like, you can still have fantastic stats and not win the game because you're not getting into the end zone. You make the defense makes the stops where it matters, and the fact that it was a one score game the last time they played, I think the motivation's there for UNLV, and you know they will know the mistakes that they made last game against Genty and fix them. And if they do, guess what? Now you make the quarterback have to throw the ball, and I just don't see that boding well for them.
It's a lot more difficult to beat a team twice in a season. I'm a big believer in that. When Bama beat Georgia in the SEC championship, the worst thing that could have happened was they let Georgia in the playoff that year because when they met in the Natty, they knew what to expect. Like you get just what you talked about. You knew the mistakes that you made the first time around. It's like, no, dude, you're gonna have to find a new way to beat us because you're not beating us that way. I can
Correct.
see them 100% being like, absolutely not. Genty's not beating us. You can do whatever you want, but he's not going to. This is not how this game's going to go. He can have 200 yards, but you're going to waste your time. We're going to find ways to score.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how I feel about it. Next game up, you've got Iowa State, Arizona. Well, let me go back to the Boise. The Boise one's important because if Boise loses this game, the Big 12 championship game is really, I don't see the Big 12 championship, that team's going in to the top four and getting a bye. Like if Boise State gets beat, that's the next team up. The crazier one is that if Boise State loses and Clemson wins, what happens? Like I think that UNLV is the team that's left out on as the number 12 seed. Like they're I don't see the committee under any circumstance giving UNLV a
Yeah,
first
team.
round bye.
Yeah, for sure.
Like it's going to be the winner of the Iowa State, Arizona State, Clemson, either Texas or Georgia, Oregon, Penn State. There's no chance that the committee tells me that UNLV's better than Clemson if they end up winning, or better than Iowa State, Arizona State. I just don't see it. You have any qualms with that?
No, I don't.
Okay. The Iowa State, Arizona State. Who do you like in the game? Arizona State right now is -2.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like watching them just dog walk Arizona last week was, I mean, you call it a rivalry game if you want to. It didn't seem like much of a rivalry in my opinion. Um, I think they're playing really good football right now. Like all the pieces have come together. Versus Iowa State, in my opinion, has been really skeptical as of lately. You know, they barely squeaked out a win over Kansas State here. It was a field goal game against Utah, with Utah being a struggle bus all season. You know, and before that, they even got upset, you know, by Kansas when Kansas went on their little run, you know, a couple weeks ago. I think there's too many gaps with Iowa State right now versus how they started out. We're like, hey, this is the team to beat out of the Big 12, and then they started losing games. Uh, man, Arizona State, being able to knock off BYU, I think really kind of catapulted them into this discussion of, hey, will they be able to slide in? If some of the top 12 teams lose this week, and I think they're going to be finding their way in from the 15, getting catapulted up into one of the last spots.
For me, this is Arizona State's game.
Mm-hmm.
Arizona State's hot. Like,
Yep.
if all the teams playing right now, I think that Arizona State's playing the best in terms of their own brand of football. How that equates against, I'm not saying that they're the favorite to win it all. How that equates going against a Georgia, Oregon, just really when I say that, it's more about the depth of when your second, third string defensive lineman's coming in. How do they fare against a bigger opponent? I don't know. Remains to be seen. I will tell you though that if Arizona State gets in and they're the number 12 sitting there playing Notre Dame,
Mm-hmm.
Notre Dame has looked very, very good since their loss to NIU. Their defense has played exceptionally well. The offense has looked better. I understand they really haven't played a whole lot of people. It looked great, them having the 2 pick sixes versus USC, but let's not forget, before that first pick six, USC had the ball with the opportunity to tie the game. Like, it was a lot closer than the score says.
Checks.
This to me is going to be the typical Notre Dame. All the pressure, regardless of who Notre Dame plays, will be on Notre Dame. Because I get Chip Kelly's not there, but it's going to be, can you overcome what's happened of being playoff Notre Dame, getting absolutely embarrassed twice by Bama, losing against Clemson. Notre Dame has had a history with the CFP of not playing well enough to get into the playoffs and then getting boat walked right on out. I sort of see the same thing happening. Like, if Arizona State comes in, I think that people will be surprised by how well Arizona State plays against Notre Dame.
Yeah, and I mean, you said it. I mean, I texted Maul on Saturdays like, there's not a more depressing way to watch the end of this game than what we just saw happen. USC literally in the red zone times two by pick sixes. Like, like you couldn't write that ending any better for if you were Notre Dame, to make it look like you just blew them out. But let's be honest, you were about to lose the game, and the quarterback made 2 bad throws. So I think they're beatable. We've seen that they've been beatable. I mean, nobody's talking about it, and you nailed it perfectly earlier in the season. Like, the best part of them losing week 3 to NIU is nobody's going to be talking about it here in December, and that's exactly what's happening. Nobody's even saying it. They're like, yeah, Notre Dame's such a strong favorite going into the CFP, yada yada yada. It's like, well, watch out, because obviously you didn't watch the end of the USC game, when they were on the ropes and then got 2 lucky breaks.
Notre Dame's getting a bye.
Mm.
You know, if Georgia ends up losing, whoever loses the conference championship game's not getting a bye. Like, they're going from being a loser in the conference championship game to turning around, probably hosting a game at home, but they didn't get a bye. Notre Dame gets the privilege of being like, well, we did our regular season that we built ourselves, even gave ourselves an easy opponent like NIU and still lost. And guess what? We're going to get a home game against really the weakest seeded playoff team per the committee's standings. Like, that to me, like, if I'm Arizona State as a coach, like, I'm a big believer that coaches like really can influence their players with just how you're talked about. No one's going to give us a chance. Like, Arizona State should come in so loose. Like, even though it will be their first time ever in the playoffs, it's like no one expects you to win. I guarantee you Notre Dame's probably a 10 to 14 point favorite if that matchup happens, and it will all be about Notre Dame going and playing Boise next or whoever. Like, this game's out of sight. No one's giving you a chance. It was like last year with Washington playing Oregon.
Yeah.
Oregon was already written in. Like, no one gave Washington a chance, and Washington went in there and absolutely boat raced them. right out of the building. I can see, and it's because you could tell Washington was loose. It wasn't until they got to the national championship game that you could tell that it like set in, like, oh man, we're here. And they just couldn't execute. But yeah,
And the thing that really I wish we had more of an insight to how these programs operate. I was listening, to Saban on McAfee last weekend, and he asked him, he's like, "Hey, coach, like when you had these long 2 week breaks, in between games, like how did you keep your guys motivated?" And he's like, "Honestly, listen, if I practiced them the whole time, like we were flat. Like I learned those lessons, out of the 4 national championships, that I got bounced from." I learned those lessons, versus the 7 that I won. And he was essentially saying, like, if I tried to ride them hard, all the way through from essentially the last win going into the next game, like it just wouldn't work because I would over practice them. So by the time we came to the game, it didn't work, and they were flat and they just weren't ready to play. They just were making all these mistakes because they had the pressure on them, yada, yada, yada. Long story short, he's like, "Hey, I just opened up the gym. Like the week before, I would just open up the gym. Hey, boys, 7-on-7. I'm not watching. Like I don't think it was to that extent, but he's like, you just give them 7-on-7s. Just let them go out there and play football. Like don't practice them. Just give them a little bit of time to go play football, just to stay loose, not to get hurt, and then a week out is, hey, now we're back to practice, type of deal, like to make sure that they're going to stay locked in. And it's curious with Marcus Freeman being as young of a coach as he is, like what are you doing right now? Like how are you preparing your team not to get upset in the first round of the CFP?
well, that, and I saw his name was name dropped for the Bears job
No,
today.
stop.
Well,
Stop.
I only say it as when it's interesting because I think that coaches are going to start getting, especially in the playoff era, and I think that coaches are prone to leave college because they don't have to deal with NIL. Like you go to the pros, there's a draft, here's how much you get paid, there's a salary cap. There's so much less stress at the pro level.
And turning down recruiting.
Yeah, 100%. Like
Yeah.
NFL get a guaranteed contract. Go ask Eberflus. My man, I don't know if you saw, for the next 2 years, every single minute, he's getting paid $13.50 a minute. He's getting paid $20,000 a day. If I had a son, it would not be play football. It would be, you need to grow up and coach football, because if you can ever score that top tier job, when you get fired, make it rain. Because it's Jimbo Fisher. He's being paid $27,000 a day for the next 7 years. 7 years. Everyone's like, I wonder if Jimbo had taken their job. Why? You couldn't get me in the building. I'd be playing golf every day. Every day.
I would take that 20,000 for lessons. Yeah.
Yeah, think about that. Like you could go pay to fly first class on Delta One, the lay down seats every single day and still have money left over. Like, yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. I think more relevant, that's the thing too that they're looking with Ryan Day, is that he's got a $37 million buyout. I know it's not the $70 million for Jimbo, but it's it's still up there for, are they willing to pull the trigger on this?
Now, if anyone needs a reason to root for Bama, it is that if Bama goes into Ohio State first week of the playoffs and beats them, you can rest assured Ryan Day's fired.
I mean, I think he has to go to the Natty.
He has to win the Natty.
Yeah, like I think the writing's already on the wall.
Yes. Like, dude, that was for as much smack as that dude talks, like, dude, that meme I sent you guys of, Ryan, you have a call on line 1, it's Lou Holtz's face. Like, but it's true. I think, like, Ohio State was out physicaled that whole game. And even after the game, they were. And he's like standing there like, well, it's our field. It's not right. Like, I love when they asked Shador or Sharon, Michigan's coach, they were like, do you think that's a loser thing? And he's like, well, I'm not a loser because we didn't lose. We won. Next question. I was like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Like, so yeah, just as a little plug for if Bama actually makes it in. So before we get to the big game of Georgia, Texas, we'll go to that Clemson SMU. I feel like all the pressure is going to be on SMU.
Agreed.
This is one of those games that sort of like the UNLV. Now I get that UNLV's got to see Boise State before. This for me, I can see Clemson winning right now. The line, I believe, is it's -2.5 for SMU. I ain't confident on this. Like, I really think Clemson will show up. I think this will be a very, very good game. But if you put a gun to my head and said you got to pick, I'm taking Clemson to win. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I've been on the SMU train this whole entire season, but I agree with everything you're saying. The fact that it's almost a scratch, from the line. And here's the piece too that some people might not be looking at so much is Clemson's been here before. Like we forget where Dabo was, 10 years ago. Sitting on top of the pedestal with, Deshaun and those teams that he was rolling with. Like Dabo has the experience in these games that SMU just doesn't yet. My biggest concern for SMU is if they're going to be able to get through the defense of Clemson. Like we always know Clemson has a good defense. They really haven't had a good quarterback. Like you could say T Law, but I overlook T Law. I go right to Deshaun was their last good quarterback that Clemson has had because DJ didn't work out. Klubnik's not truly working out. Like he's okay, but it's not that pro level. Hey, this guy's getting drafted in the first round type play. So for me, I agree. I think Clemson defense is going to step up and win this game for them. I hate to say it because I've been on the SMU bandwagon all year. If they come out, and that Clemson doesn't have an answer for that offense, then sure, I would take SMU all day. But again, like you said, you put a gun to my head, I'm going to take Clemson just because Dabo's experience in these games.
SMU has to get off to a fast start.
Mm-hmm.
I sit back and I'm looking at just their schedule. So they had the early week 3 loss against BYU, 18-15. But then when you sort of go through their schedule, you start finding some games. Louisville, I get that they beat Clemson. It was close, 34-27. A few weeks later, at Duke, 28-27, barely squeaking by Duke. Boston College, 38-28. For me, it's that they're going to have to show up against Clemson. I'm 100% in that boat with you that I get that guys on Clemson may have not played in this game before, but Dabo knows what's coming. Like Dabo's been there. He'll have the team well coached. Clemson still has really good players.
And for them, it's their redemption. Like they're a 3-loss team. This is their last shot.
Correct.
They win this game. All right, sweet, we're going.
You're in.
Yeah,
you're in. Like you're guaranteed a spot. You win this game, you're in. That for me, I can't. I would love to see the Golden Express keep running, but it will take a very good game from SMU. And really, on the other side, it's can you make Klubnik look bad? He's been made to look bad throughout this season. You sit back and you look at South Carolina, they beat them. Louisville beat them. Georgia absolutely boat walked them. I sit back and that's where I go, SMU, if you got a chance, you have to come out firing on offense and you have to make Klubnik turn the ball over. If you can do those two things, SMU will beat Clemson. But the longer they let Clemson hang around or they trail Clemson, the more and more pressure will be on SMU.
Well, yeah, and I mean Clemson's coming off of a loss too, so I mean the intrinsic motivation is already there for most of those players.
This for me is the real question. Clemson wins. Do they boot SMU from the playoff?
I feel like this is where Miami. Dude, man, this is close. Between a 2-loss Miami and SMU. If you went purely on rankings, I think Miami would be the first one gone, and you'd have to keep SMU.
Well, based upon how the rankings are going to work, Bama will be the last team in, regardless of where, because Clemson could be ranked 14th in the country, but the thing is it's the top 5 highest conference champions they're going to get in. So regardless of wherever Clemson's ranked, if they're one of the top 5 highest conference champs, they're going to get in, which they're going to be. Like plain and simple. They're not going to let, Army or the other championship games, Army and Tulane. Like, I sit back and I go, neither one of those teams is making it. Sorry. Even if UNLV beats Boise State, they're not going to put Army or Tulane in over UNLV. It's not going to happen. So I sit back and the argument's going to be the exact same one that it was for Miami. Like, SMU is going to be sitting there with 2 losses. Well, they lost to Clemson. Clemson got beat by Georgia. Georgia got beat by Bama. Then you look at just SMU's record and you're like, well, who are we talking about? Like, no one's ranked. Like, Pitt's not ranked. Louisville's not ranked. They don't have a ranked win. They have looked good at times. And
well, they were ranked when they played, though.
Yes, they played Louisville when they were ranked. They played Pitt when they were ranked. But no one right now is currently ranked, which when you sit back and you look at it through that scope, then you just sort of go, okay, where do you want to put them? Because if the committee is going to judge Miami how they judge them and drop them behind Bama, I think that this is setting the press. And I talked about this. I'm not sure if I made this prediction. I know I talked about it with you guys on the phone, so at least I'll have the word of you that I did go on the record saying this. When Miami lost, I texted you guys and I said, Miami, there's no chance that the committee is going to make it to where you're going to have 3 ACC teams represented. Like, because if Clemson wins, they would have been forced to do this. They would have been forced to put 3 ACC teams in. They weren't going to let that happen. So that's why Miami's behind. If Clemson wins, what do you do with SMU? I sit back and I go, dude, I think they're out. And that's not me saying they should be. I think that's what happens. Like, I can easily see that transpiring just because the committee has the committee is, and Maul would sit here and I can already hear Maul just being like, the bias on this. Like, I can hear him yelling. Is there Alabama bias? 10,000%. 10,000%. I think the committees, the only way they could have solved this was leaving Miami in it. That was it. It wasn't about the 3 SEC teams. It was about Miami. Everyone's going to argue over Bama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, which one of those should have gotten in. It was never about that. We can sit back and have that discussion. That's what everyone's like having the argument about. The real argument was about Miami, which you brought it up, which I think is a great point. Miami, this is where that voter, the person who actually watches the games, like, I can see it. It's like, dude, should have lost Virginia Tech. Yep. There was a controversial ruling. Cal's beating you. Should have lost to Cal. There's been multiple times this season that Miami has been getting beat by a sub good program.
In the fourth quarter.
Yep. Now, Miami did what Bama couldn't do against bad talent. They ended up winning those games, except for 2. They got beat by Georgia Tech, who took Georgia to 8 overtimes, and they lost to Syracuse, who I think Syracuse is actually a pretty good team.
And I just love that McCord rubbed it in Ryan Day's face in the post game.
Comes full circle.
Yeah.
Like, dude, yeah. 100%. I think that if McCord's on Ohio State, they win. They win that game. They probably beat Oregon.
Yeah.
Like, just the way that it is. Sitting there looking. So I'm with you. I think Clemson gets the upset. What the committee does will be even more controversial next week if that happens. But I'm going to go ahead and call it. Like, that's what I see happening. If SMU wins, it makes the committee's job so much easier, and that's what the committee's going to hope for. But this is just like last year when Bama beat Georgia. It put them in the position where they were like, well, Texas beat Bama. Even though we think Texas is the worst team now, we can't put Bama in without putting Texas in. So what do we got to do? We got to leave out Florida State. Yep. There's going to be those questions that come in post this. That's just where I see it. Then the game, your team, Texas, comes to Atlanta. Really a road game, even though they're the home team.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Playing Georgia. Right now, Texas is -2.5, which if I was Steve Sarkisian, that's the last thing I wanted, was to be favored. What are your thoughts? Second time seeing them.
Man, the one thing that scares me is I go back just The defensive line of Georgia single-handedly won the Texas game for them. And just going to last week, Texas gets up 17-0 at halftime against A&M, doesn't score a single point the rest of the game. I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to do that against Georgia. And Quinn Ewers got, I wouldn't, yeah, he got sloppy, and he threw that pick six, and just the play was not there. Like, thankfully, they had the running back that was running all up and down A&M. But guess what? You're not going to be able to do that against Georgia. I'm sorry. Like, yeah, you got some dogs in the trenches, but Georgia's also already shown you that, uh, you know, they're able to penetrate, and it's going to be a dogfight at the line of scrimmage. So how does Texas win this game? In my personal opinion, I hate to say it because I think Quinn's probably going to end up playing the whole game, but I would play Archie. Like this is one of those scenarios you're probably going to, or excuse me, you're going to be in the whole shebang. So I would not be afraid to bench Quinn in this game if things started getting out of hand and you thought Arch has more athleticism. Arch is also not injured right now, wearing an ankle brace. The good thing that they have going for him is we've seen Carson Beck start slow in these types of games and end up losing these games or not losing these games, but putting
Oh, he's
Georgia.
lost games.
Yeah, he's lost games for Georgia single handedly, just by making terrible decisions. So if the defense, which Texas defense is the best in the land right now, if they're able to confuse him and he's missing his reads and throwing it to the defense and they capitalize, like, I think it's going to work out well for Texas. The other part, Carson Beck made a statement this week that he doesn't watch football. He says it's stressful for him. It's like, wait a second, dog. Like, that's your job, and like it's stressful for you to watch this. And so he showed that he's a little vulnerable in his mental state with his mental health, that he doesn't like watching football outside of playing it. So, uh, just goes to show Mel Kiper's really choosing a gym to be top of the ranking boards after this season. I'll leave it over to you, but I want Quinn Ewers on the bench, in my personal opinion.
The words that you said is exactly where I'm going to go with this, which is mental state. To me, Texas comes in nervous.
Yeah.
This is still Georgia. This is the team that you wanted, you got at home, at night, at Texas Field, and really got the break speed off of you. You could do nothing right that game. It got close late because your fans decided to throw water bottles on the field. But in a game like this, I just sort of sit back, and that to me is what if Texas comes out flat and like you can tell they're scared again, dude, Georgia's gonna beat them again, handedly. I don't know if Texas's tackle, who's projected as a top 10 pick, is gonna start this week. I know he got hurt last week. The biggest thing that I see from Texas that it's the major red flag from them. They really do not have a dynamic wide receiver in terms of just like that dude that it's like last year with Worthy and Mitchell, it was just they had two dogs, as McAfee says, that just they made plays. I don't see that. Do they have guys out there that make good plays? 100%. I'm not taking anything away from their core, but they don't have that Ryan Williams, that Jeremiah. They don't have that guy that it's like, dude, if someone's going to beat us, it's going to be that guy. Yeah. Isaiah Bond's out there.
He hasn't shown up.
Yeah. Correct. Like he has not had. He's had exactly sort of what he did at Bama. He's had flashes where you sit back and go, oh man, like he's a good player, but the biggest knack on Isaiah Bond is he's not a really big kid. Like he's not a 50-50 ball. He's a guy that beats you down the sideline, and if he gets behind you, he's gone. But he's not that guy that it's like, that's the dude that I need running over the middle, catching these difficult patches, going high point in a football. That's not who Isaiah Bond is. So when I sit back and look at it, I'm in this of the opinion, which this is the crazy thing for me to say, the way you beat Georgia is you have to run the football.
Yeah.
But you have to have a running quarterback. Like Georgia has not played well. Even Hayes King with Georgia Tech made them look bad because he ran. Who gives you that best option?
Archie.
Archie.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you said it first, not me. That to me is the difference in the game. Is you have to have a mobile quarterback to put Georgia into unfavorable situations. Because if Arch can run and he's picking, it doesn't have to. I'm not talking 50-yard runs. I'm not talking Milrow. I'm talking just positive plays, 5, 7 yards. If he picks up 10 yards and gets a first, even better. But I'm not needing him to be a hero. I just need him to keep giving me favorable down and distances. If he can do that, which I don't think Quinn Ewers can because of the ankle. Like that's why I said the other side of the ball is easy. You just have to make Carson Beck look bad. If you can get him to throw interceptions, Texas has a great chance regardless of who they play at the position of quarterback. Carson Beck has somehow for the last few weeks not had a bad game. You know, it's funny because when you text me over 2.5, I was like, I want to say over, but that's not who he's been the last few weeks.
Yeah.
He has played a lot better within the constraints of that offense. But even Georgia's offense, like you sit back and you look at them, they're not dynamic. They have good players. They're very similar to Texas. Like I think Georgia runs the football a little bit better, but can Texas get to Beck? Can they rough him up? Can they get him to turn the ball over? If they can, Texas wins. But if you're asking me who I'm taking right now,
Georgia.
I'm taking Georgia.
Well, and that's the thing, man. Being in the Mercedes Dome, like it sucks already. You know, you're at a disadvantage. You know, you're going to tell me that half of that stadium is going to be burnt orange. Like, I doubt it. Like, I seriously doubt it. I know Texas travels pretty well, but there's going to be a lot of Georgia people that are going to be buying out that stadium as well. Also, the thing for me too with Quinn, like I was saying, playing sloppy. Like you go back to the Georgia game, a lot of the reason why that they were down so much, it was 23-0 at halftime, I believe. The reason why they were down that much was there were 2 turnovers, you know, in the red zone uh, for Georgia. Like Texas was, you know, just starting drives off on their side of the field, and there were 2 turnovers. So Georgia got up super early to start the game, and then it only continued to spiral from there. But yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Like looking at the offense of Texas, their lead receiver right now is the tight end, Gunnar Helm. That's kind of concerning. You know that your number one target is going to be your tight end, and hopefully Wisner can have another good game. We saw him run up and down A&M last weekend. His biggest game yet, almost 200 yards. I don't think he's going to do that, but you know, if he can take off for, you know, anywhere from the 90 to 120 range, you know, I think Texas will have a decent advantage. And like you said, Sark's got to have some plan for Arch in this game to, you know, come out and do something, in my opinion.
So let's just say that this scenario works out. And how I plan on doing this next week, we'll probably have sort of a quick episode. Once the committee makes their rank, once the conference championship games happen, I'd like for us all to get on and just give what we think the playoff's going to be. Because I think before the committee ever gives their rankings, we're going to have it as is, which, like I talked about, it sees because I sit back and I'm looking. Like, let's say that what we say happens: Oregon wins, Georgia wins, Arizona State wins, Clemson wins, and UNLV wins. Like I have the number one team being Oregon in terms of the bracket, not how they're ranked 1 through 12 or in that order, but just how the bracket looks. I got Oregon at 1, Georgia at 2, Arizona State at 3, and Clemson at 4. The number 12 seed in this case would be UNLV. They would play Notre Dame. Then you sit back and you go, okay, so where do they start putting teams and in what order? The next highest seed in this scenario would play one of 2 teams. They're either going to play Bama or they're going to play SMU. How the committee ranks that, I don't know. The question is going to be is it, in my opinion, it's either going to be Ohio State or it's going to be Texas. One of those 2 teams. If it's Ohio State, the issue is, or the non-issue is that you won't create another repeat matchup. at the number 6 seed. So Ohio State would have to be ranked higher than Texas in this in order to play Bama. The reason for that is Texas would be the number 7. They would end up playing Indiana. And that's why I just say if you flop those two, if Ohio State's ranked less than Texas, Texas would play Bama, sounds good, but then you have Ohio State play in Indiana again. They don't want that. They're not going to have that repeat matchup.
Yep.
Texas in this scenario would end up playing Indiana. Penn State would get a home game against Tennessee. That's how if our prediction right now holds up, that's how I see it going based upon our predictions of how the conference championship games go. But like I said, I think people, if there's upsets, which I think there's going to be, are going to be a little surprised with how the committee in the end moves some teams around to just create some matchups that you don't have repeat games. They don't want that. Outside of that, that's really the big stuff for college. You got anything else?
No, man. That was good.
All right. Well, that's our college football reaction yet again. Committees are overrated. You need it. There needs to be some skin in the game for actually how the season went. Some things that hold the committee to you can't move a team so far out. What you do on the field has to matter, and it has to be more than just a subjective view. I can't. Maul says this well, we all say it all the time. Can you imagine if this year we were just like, yeah, Buffalo's got the number 1 seed, but I don't really like Buffalo. I still think Baltimore's the number 1 seed. Like that, the NFL does not have this problem because they don't sit back and go, oh, well, we don't like how that looks. Like, we don't feel that you're the number. Sorry, Detroit. Like, we're not a big fan of Detroit. You're still getting the number 4 seed regardless of how you play. People would lose their minds in the NFL. They'd burn down cities. They've already burned down Detroit once. They'd do it again. Like, for me, this is where the committee, it is wrong. Like, and the reason people are upset is because the committee's not held to anything. There's no, based upon how the team played, the committee can only do X with them because regardless of what the committee thinks, they've proved it on the field. So, anything else?
No, that was good.
Sorry. One last side ran in before we tune off. Well, time Pull Chalks. We'll get the NFL episode done and we'll get that all posted. But thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys after the conference championship games.